Okay, we are live with a makeshift approach to what's going on with the show. I've created some visual images here that will kind of work for the moment, and we'll kind of see what's happening here. This is, technically speaking, Evolution Hour 109, not as I would yet like to have it, but we're still trying to figure things out. And of course, I have no guests or anything and no way of theoretically linking to them. We're all working on that. So now I'm going to try the exciting world of the second bit, which is to show our little opening screen thing, which I believe I have to do like this. Now, theoretically, there will be sound and there will be clickety-clacks, and that will be showing up properly because I'm keeping the image on here rather than somewhere else. But yeah, streaming output, it's slow as molasses, something like that. Welcome to Troubles in Paradise, tartukinwordpress.com. Back over to here, and then we will shut that off. And then we will go to the exciting talking head mode. So we'll see how that works. I put my shameless plugs up as potentially separate windows that I can switch over to during the course of the show. And this will obviously be one which is not as impressive as I might like, but we're in a learning curve after the stupid vacation. So hi, gang, in the live chat. And we are about 8 minutes away from what was actually going on. Let me turn off Twitter here. I'm live and shutting down Twitter. Oops. Till after the show. Okay, I don't want to have dead air time. What can I do? Okay, so we'll shut that one down and see what was going on in here. Theoretically, the logo worked. I've got, I put the texts of the shameless plugs and things in separate windows that I can switch to in due course. And the camera, we've determined that what Google Hangouts did effortlessly, this system doesn't do nearly as effortlessly, and that's we'll have to be working around that as time passes. So it'll be a clumsy version, and so of what was going on, because I can't even show you what anything looks like. I had planned to have some material up on the radioactive dating crap that Samford and company were doing in their dating methods. They're Samford and Rupi, the contested bone books that I've been evaluating all of this time, and I'll put some links up eventually when I edit the video so that we'll be able to find out what it was I was actually referring to. It'll be a backwards way of approach. They're young Earth creationists, but they've been shy about revealing it. So what they've had is a tendency, oh, hello, Immutable Destiny and Old Scratch. You are watching a very pared down version of RJ. A still picture, because although the camera works, it produces such horrible lag time that it's unworkable. So at the moment, even at the lower resolution, so we don't know yet whether or not we'll have to get a different platform, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, at least I got a show kind of around at the right time. My intention was to go through and pick up the various technical literature that they were doing on some of these technical papers and various criticisms and discussions of them on their isotopic dating methods and the extent to which they were claiming that dates were way off the mark according to the standard evolutionary model, without paying attention to why they seemingly were way off the mark. Anything involving argon in lava flows had to be dealt with for years to figure out, wait a minute, argon can flow. It's a gas, you know. And so the idea that it can muck up around in a volcanic deposit and leave erroneous dates, especially if it's really recent. Or it can be affected by whether it's underwater or not, because that changes the way that argon, active argon, gets leaked away, so that the ideally, once that's happened, the only real argon you're going to acquire is the stuff that's decayed from the decay chains of the original isotopes. And that's why they had to figure all of this stuff out. Well, Ruby and Samford, neither one of whom are geochemists, have not bothered to explain all that much. And what I will be putting in will be some of the sources that I've had to check up on that. That's where I was interrupted at the midstream when I went on vacation. And so I plead horribly guilty to actually enjoying myself for a couple of weeks in non-tip related work to deal with. This chapter goes on for about, it's a fairly extensive one. It actually runs for about 30 pages of where I would imagine that they're laying out their arguments and then repeating themselves. The fundamental issue is to where are Ruby and Samford ever going to fairly explain the whys of why individual radiometric dating techniques need to be paying attention to a lot of variables? And I don't think they're ever going to be doing that. And we'll be finding that out as I would be going through the whole text. So this is will have to be regarded as a very lame, truncated version of my normal material, because I would have all that stuff set up and I would have direct links for you all on that. And we would have a guest perhaps, which we have not yet worked out whether or not we can even do that in this particular platform, whether it's Jackson or Karis or SciStrike or any of you in the audience. We're still working on that. And if we've got cameras, that's a problem. So this is probably going to be only a training wheel thing. What can I say? Anyway, the other half of the show that I would be dealing with, and again, I will be sticking links up later. There is a studio thing that I can get to later on to edit the video, and I'll put the links and stuff in there after the fact. It's a clumsy way of doing it, and I want something better. I like the format where I can edit all the material before it actually goes on the air and have it all constructed. And there was a menu that I thought was able to do that. And oh yeah, there we go. I think that's view your dashboard. And that was concealed in another bit. It's going to take me a while to get used to all of this. Immutable destiny, at least it's not the what does my book say argument. They have not discussed any of the biblical issues yet, which is annoying. I mean, if you're going to be a young earth creationist, go right ahead and say so. Put it up in your introduction. Give the basic argument of what you're going to show in the story. But that's not what they do. It's a dangler of where they start out with doubts and doubts and doubts and doubts and doubts and complaints without ever really showing the ball that they have hidden away. And I find that rather annoying. I'm much happier with somebody who's an honest one, who comes up and says what your position is, what you're going to be showing, and all that. Mutable Destiny says Google Meets is very similar to Hangouts. You would just have to stream using OBS. That we'll find out whether or not Sci is the technical guru here who can maybe guide me through all of this. There's a lot about this particular platform, this Go Lightstream one, that is actually quite attractive. It automatically accesses the YouTube. It puts the chat window up instantly. I don't have to worry about all that stuff. And if the video aspect were working, then that would be just fine. But the fact that it may be the case that many platforms are going to have some troubles on that. I was happy that the old one worked as smoothly as it did, and we'll be up in the air as to whether we can resolve this thing. But I would really love it if more anti-evolutionists were just honest about what they think. And first of all, to work out what their hypothesis is, not what their anti-hypothesis is. One of the things that you really find a lot if you've been exploring anti-evolutionism for any length of time, and this is just as true of flat earthers and anti-vaxxers and all of that, is that theirs is an against position. They're citing material that they supposedly think is a problem, not what their positive explanation. Nida said, I would say if you're a YEC, young earth creationist, just don't bother with science and use magic as an answer. I'll be more charitable that although you get a lot of, in principle, magic-y stuff from a lot of grassroots creationists, the professional ones, the ones that do it, ICR and AIG, and for that matter, the people at the Discovery Institute over in the Intelligent Design Land, and you, Ross, at Reasons to Believe, they're not appealing to the Bible as magic. They argue that the true science, the true data, properly interpreted, comports to the biblical concepts as they conceive of them. And the problem comes, how much of the data are they dealing with? Have they really worked out what they think happened? And are they able to anticipate and account for data productively? But I won't accuse the vast majority of them of arguing that it's just the magic book. No, they're genuinely trying to be sciencey. In fact, if you look at the heavy guns in the anti-evolution movement, they are just chock-a-block with footnotes. It's hard to find a technical paper that are more reference heavy than something from Andrew Snelling, the creationist geologist, or Jeffrey Tompkins, the creationist geneticist. They will have 100, 150 or more references in one of their little technical papers, and it's thick. But that's, of course, a dangerous road to go if you're coming at this from a source methods thing, because then you can pin down whether or not the data the discussion they're making is justified by the sources they have. So Immutable Destiny brings up a lot of creationists are using the teach the controversy style. That's very much an intelligent design position. It's a mutant version of equal timeism. That was the old creationist doctrine back in the 1980s. But the actual teach the controversy trope is very much a Discovery Institute bit. Stephen Meyer and that gang have been going on about this for years. And it's an evasion, because you have to argue first that, is there a controversy? You know, if you're teaching a controversy that doesn't exist, like teach the controversy about the flat earth. No, there is no controversy about flat earth. The earth isn't flat, and therefore it's not an equal time issue. It's not a matter of teaching the controversy. All you're doing is evaluating the data and seeing why is it that the believer doesn't pay attention to that. And intelligent design falls into exactly the same category. They're a very limited data field, and my job, and I would hope more and more people who are picking up on source methods, is to evaluate what arguments are being put forward by the anti-evolutionist, and to what extent is that teach the controversy thing a misnomer. That you don't have to bother about the controversy. Make your damn case. Put forward what you think happened, offer the evidence for it, account for all the relevant data. If you have problems accounting for some data, openly discuss that and explain why there are problems and what you think might be the solutions to it. And that's what happens in real disciplines. But that's not what you get in either creationism, old or young, and intelligent design, or in other ones that function identically. Anti-vaxxers, Holocaust deniers, moon landing is a hoax, all that kind of stuff. Let's see what's going on over here. Brian Stevens, hello. And SciStrike, who has been helping shepherding me from zero to this clumsy, club-footed as best I can for the moment. Brian Stevens wasn't intentional. Last he said when I was hearing was no show tonight. Yeah, I was hoping that I was able to get something off the ground. We were trying and trying and trying to do as best we could on the video front, but it was snagging up all the time. So you get a talking picture. Illustrated radio. What can I say? I'll preach the main issue is methods. And everybody, if everybody who knows everybody else starts infecting in them a desire to look at primary source material as much as possible, it means that instead of having just me and Pelagia and other people that are functioning like that same Mo, Jackson Wheat, and I, as little seed corn people doing their gig, what if you have 100 and eventually 1,000 and eventually 10,000 people who may not be able to devote as much time to an individual topic as any one of us may be able to, but collectively if the information can be passed efficiently, we can then jumpstart our game. So collectively, we are paying attention to all the incoming science data and all the anti-evolutionist arguments, and in our various interconnective systems, able to respond to them real time in debates on social media like Twitter and Facebook and anywhere else. So it means that you don't have the white knight of me or anybody else picking up the whole game. It's everybody collectively working together and communicating information efficiently. So the idea would be that everybody gets to pick everybody else's brain and find ways of connecting up in that way, to where I've saved Jackson Wheat time because I already knew the background of something, and so he doesn't have to spend as much time. Ovestia says, James, are you home? Yes. If I had my camera, you would still see my den as background. Someday, perhaps we'll go the fancy schmancy green screen route to create a virtual room into which I'm sitting. But yeah, that's not particularly interesting. The Immutable Destiny asks, why is it that it appears at least creationists don't update their arguments with newly reported science data? Most of them seem to be from the 90s and before. Oh, you've implicitly answered the question there, because they're, first of all, most of them are not workers in the field that they are talking about. They're interlopers, they're secondary redactors. And the vast majority of anti-evolutionists are simply copying other people's arguments. It's an extreme case in the case of somebody like a Kent Hovind, who's a bottom feeder, and his arguments are stuck even farther back than that. Most of it's in the 70s and 80s. But an extremely small number of anti-evolutionists have a measure of technical expertise where they are kind of bumping into the current literature. You find James Tour, the chemist, who is trying to keep up with stuff. You find, well, oddly, not so much Andrew Snelling. You'll find an awful lot of the young Earth creationist apologetics is coming from people like Tim Clary and others in the Acts and Facts magazine, which is available open access from Institute for Creation Research. That's another thing about, if you want to go after the creationists, they put their stuff up for you to see. Answers in Genesis, their stuff is available free. You don't have to pay anything for it. Even a bunch of their older books, big chunks of those are in fact available for gratis. And so they're laying their argument out for everybody. But that's when you can start seeing how little of the current information is popping up on their scope. What tends to get addressed are things that are hitting the main news. So especially in relation to human evolution. So if you find some grand new find relating to human evolution that hits the evening news, you can guarantee it's going to get a slew of coverage from the various anti-evolutionists, because they want to compete or combat that public media thing. But obscure technical literature on the origin of multicellularity and the dynamics of volvacines are ones that aren't really popping up much on their scope, because virtually none of them are workers in the field. A few of them have been published in the field, but none are heavy guns. It's not a case of where a major scientist, major one working in paleontology or genetics or biology, comes to their epiphany and decides the evidence is better explained by intelligent design or creationism. Those are few and far between, even at the middling level, and non-existent at the higher echelon level. There hasn't been a notable convert from the real heavy guns in the scientific field in the last 100 years. That's telling us everything when we start looking at their primary sources. Then we got some stuff. Oh, Kent Hovind, Evil Lotion said, well, Kent Hovind says if you're already right, you don't have to change it. That certainly is a bottom feeder, Kent. That's what I called him, and he didn't like that at all. Brian Stevens says, Kent is an insult to crustaceans everywhere. Kent is an insult to metazoans in general. And in fact, even prokaryotes ought to be insulted that they're related to him. And the sadness is nobody has an excuse for that level of ignorance now. When somebody like Kent was going into the field in the 1980s and 90s, it was very difficult to acquire primary source data. unless you lived next door to a college that had a really good library, and then you photocopied a hell of a lot. The idea that you could find 80 to 90% of the technical literature and even full-length books, open access, full PDFs that you can download and read at your leisure. Oh no, that wasn't the case. But it is now. And that means if I, old fart RJ, clumsily working from my den in my research base, can find this information, what the hell's stopping them? Well, it's just plain laziness. So if the more people out there who move past the secondary redaction, move past the National Geographic thing. If you're not planning on debating creationists, it's no big deal. But if you're planning on interacting or disputing with anti-evolutionists at any level in any social media, you should arm yourself with that source methods. And you need to be familiar enough with the technical jargon that you can understand what they're talking about and know when you're being jargoned by creationists. Standing for Truth is notorious on that. He likes to just sound ever so erudite because he's copied the jargon that he's got from Jeffrey Tompkins and Sanford and others. Well, you need to know where they're getting their stuff from. So it's all source methods. It's partly knowing what your opponent has argued and what data field he's relying on, or she. It's usually guys. There are a few female creationists, Georgia Purdom and others, but they're more prominent than they were decades ago, but they're still not the main players. Remember that there are only about 60 people in the entire anti-evolution business who are actually fact claimants. It's a really small gang. And that means that if you pick on an individual one, and by the way, Kent Hovind is not a fact claimant, and Ken Ham is not a fact claimant, Ray Comfort is not a fact claimant. Most of the preachers who put up videos on YouTube are not fact claimants. They're secondary copyists who are glomming onto something from somebody else. Vestas says, except if you're as wrong as Kent Hovind and had to correct everything you got wrong, compound cult members might escape. Oh yeah, well, but they don't fact check and he doesn't. They repeat the tropes. And once you identify what the tropes are, it's the duty, if you're going to debate with them or their followers, to expose the tropes and the data field. You're not going to persuade them. There's no amount of data that's going to cause Kent Hovind to change his mind. If data was going to matter, he'd have changed his mind a long time ago. So you need to observe how they're using their defense mechanisms and their Tortucan ruts to avoid thinking about stuff. In Hovind's case, there are obvious examples. He's stuck as usual on origins or bust, and in systematics, he's got, well, dogs only breed dogs, and he just goes around and around and around. That the most recent debate that was on modern day hysteria was just exactly that same thing. Nider says, after Ray Comfort showing evidence for artificial selection with bananas, we should call Camp Broccoli Man for showing evidence of natural selection. Oh, I think, in fact, Paul Logia used that very analogy in one of his videos. And if you haven't subscribed to Paul, please do it. Trey the Explainer, Bill Ludlow, there's an awful lot of people who are doing really wonderful work. That's another way to speed up the process. Videos have a downside because they take quite a while to view. And if they have relatively little data field, you have to be also there to catch the point where they're discussing a particular science paper or a particular physical deposit or a particular gene and riff off of that. And it can be a little bit of time consuming, and you have to kind of get a trick for being able to listen to a video or have it running on a side screen while you're doing other work. Hi, Puffalophagus, another a friend of the show. So in all of the work that I've been doing, and we are at episode 109 officially, that and even the ones that I was doing without the numbers earlier, it's all endeavoring to try to get people ginned up for that source methods bit. First of all, I find it terribly fun. There's few things in life that are as exhilarating as spotting where somebody has just shot their own argument to smithereens by the sources they deal with. Immutable Destiny says, one thing I've learned with trying and learning about something, say biogenesis, is the data field is huge, easily in the hundreds of thousands of papers, and it's impossible to keep track of it all. Well, that's where you use some shortcut techniques. first of all, the older the paper is, the less likely it's to be one you need to pay attention to. So what you want are cutting edge works, and you want to find review papers. You want to find a material. In fact, I should probably, let's see if I've got, I will be stepping away very briefly from the computer and hoping I can find a thing here. Let's see. Okay, back. There's a one paper in the Annual Review of Genetics, Origin and Evolution of the Universal Genetic Code, from 2017 by Eugene Koonin and Artem Novoshelov. And Koonin is one of the heavy players in a huge stretch of things. I'll put the title of that up. I don't have a linkage on it. And you may be able to find it open access. There are a variety of ways to getting around it, but you can often find other works in the same field, or even if you can get the sources that they have relied on, there's all sorts of that. And reviews, annual reviews as journals, and there's a whole bunch of them, are really, really handy in that they're doing exactly that. They're aimed for a technical audience, but they're reviewing the current state of the literature. So they're basically the handy cheat sheets to sidestep you having to read every bloody paper that's been out for the last 50 years. So you can see what work is considered important and influential and productive by the researchers doing the work now. So that's one of the things you can deal with. Another one is just make use of the stuff that's readily available. I have over 2,000 technical journals that I've gotten sources from over the years. It's impossible for a single person to keep track of every one of those bloody journals. It's just not doable. But you can get at edges of them. Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, pnas.org. If you don't know about this one, if you're going to be serious about it, that's a weekly. Go there every week and look through all the articles in there. Many of them will be on areas that won't be horribly relevant to debating a creationist. But every so often you're getting a paper where, oh gosh, there is the origin of such and so, and this technical paper on that. Although not every, initially, most of the papers will be abstract only, but after a year, everything in PNAS is open access. That's part of our wonderful national stuff. And an awful lot of the articles may actually be open access right from the get-go. So particularly really important papers are often some on climate research and social issues often are, and medical research are often open access directly. But they will be definitely after a year. Another thing you can use if you're diving into the area is when you find a paper, just look to see how much of it you grip. If there's a lot of terminology that it's like Martian, then that is clues to what you need to do to get up to speed. But all science nomenclature, all nomenclature in any specialized field, whether it's the law or piano playing or repairing a transmission, they're all things that are things that you can come to understand if you read guides and that to them. Oh gosh, that's a word I haven't invested for. I view Kenthoven as more of a plecostomist than a bottom feeder, pleco for short. My gosh, you're going to have to explain that one to me. I bet Jackson Wheat would know what it was. I'd have to look it bloody hell up. Puffalophagus says Darren Brown could probably remember a list of 2,000 sources. Yeah, I'm not that good. I have more than 2,000 sources. That's the nice advantage. And that's why I have found the reference basing and the way I've constructed my arguments as useful as possible, because I'm able to track down things that are by the same author and connect up stuff, which I've been doing in the new book, which Jackson Wheat and I are continuing to work on. Just finished chapter 6 and sent it off to him today. Tidipin, TD Lane, the Sphy. Nice to catch one of these live. Recently got in RJ's content. I apologize, Lane, that this is the clumsy version because you do not see my actual talking face. They've eliminated Google Hangouts, and so I've had to do this like in the clumsiest way possible of still pictures and all the rest. So I apologize enormously, and I'll have to be putting in my linkages to the stuff that I'll be discussing. I was also going to be discussing this stupid dinosaur encrusted sword. It was a sword that Standing for Truth brought up as one of the magnificent pieces of evidence that humans and dinosaurs coexisted. And there's, I guess, a sort of sauropody thing on the side of a sword. And it apparently doesn't dawn on Standing for Truth that it's not an old sword, for the same reason that you can buy magic wands and sorting hats and maps to Hogwarts. That doesn't mean Hogwarts is real. So the idea that there were people who have a market for making hoaxes and that there's a lot of suspicion about some of these things, Standing just doesn't quality control. He's good at repetition, but he's terrible at quality control. And anyway, in my reference field, I'm had jumped ahead a lot. If you go to my website and download any of the works there, and please do pass them around, freebie. They're open access. Everybody can make use of them. They're written in the older footnoted scholarly format. So the easiest way to do them is to download the text and then make a copy of it. So when you're reading them as a PDF, open up the second version so that you can move to the footnotes and have them open as a second window, because you can't jump back and forth easily between footnotes and text in a PDF version. I don't do that in the current writing. But anyway, that older work relied on about 5,000 some odd sources. Well, I'm way ahead of that now, and in part because the amount of information that's available is so much vaster. So at the moment, I've got about, I think, 57 or 58,000 sources. And of those, I think I'm just coming up on 27,000 technical papers. And then there's another about 10,000 general science sources. So it's a lot. Oh, Vesta informs us what a plecostomus is. It's a very common bottom feeder, commonly kept by aquarium hobbyists. Thank you so much there. Invertebrate, I'm assuming, some kind of a little wormy thing, or is it? Let us know in the. Algae eater armored. Okay, well, I think I've seen some of those in Congress. Brian Stevens says, I don't have that's free access, but maybe PNAS has one. Science and Nature are the pesky ones, because both of those are subscription only. But, and this is the big but, that if you hunt around between Academia EDU and what's the other? I've suddenly had a brain fart on it. And also college websites and professors who have written the work and posted it on their website, that an awful lot of the technical literature is available full text somewhere. And so if you just hunt around and find the right little tools on this, that's as important a tool to use as the knowledge itself. Because just blindly Google searching can sometimes lead you up brick walls. It took me a long time to find information on the evolutionary details on the evolution of the mammal jaw. But once you open up that panel and find the technical papers that were done on it, often the work was done decades ago and it's a settled issue and no one's bothered about it since. Then you can build on all of that. As a collective enterprise, there's way more of us than the stupid people. And I want to make it life miserable for the stupid people, that the Kent Hovians of the world should cringe at source methods and be very reluctant to engage again with a source methods person. They'll want to go to fresh turf. Well, if they're constantly bumping into source methods people, it's going to make life increasingly uncomfortable for them. And the ones who are the most comfortable with a debating context and have researched the material very well, those are the ones that then should focus on having debates and discussion content at that level. So everybody gets to find a way of doing a niche on things. I think theatrical experience is helpful if you're planning on being a debater. I was in college theater, and so I'm not uncomfortable in a video context, even though you might not be able to tell it from my still picture. The other aspect is, especially in a debate, you got to be able to think on your feet. We saw that with the Democratic debates, where in politics, where if somebody can't really answer a direct question directly and has to kind of fall back on their prearranged mantras, that's not good. And exactly the same case covers with creationism. Let's see, nearing about sort of half hours, so let me try my little shameless plug. Theoretically now, you should still be hearing me. And there's my tip patrons. In fact, I kind of like this mode because I don't have to screen share. It's just a matter of pipping over to another thing. So there are my patrons, the colleagues, Hendril and Puffalophagus. You're in the screen there, Puffalophagus. We are aware of you. Eric, Rowley, Cirrus, researchers, Travis and Convergent Eat and Brad and Ralph and Pelagia and Benjamin. Oh, all the people. And Ugly German Truths and Sewer. And our assistant researchers, Mike and Doranku and James and Nana and Totes Real, and our friends Daniel and Stephen Bauman and Marigale Beddoes, and Insects Are Cool and Morton Nielsen and Bo and Staggles and Alex Stone and Paul Williams, and also some legacy patrons that were able to help for a while, and the financial difficulties and other things changed all that, but I still appreciate the fact that you helped in any capacity whatsoever. Jen and Jody and John and Keith and Andrew and Dyer and Yui and Mona and Daniel and Sun Sky Stone and Everett and Zeshi. So every one of you, now I can switch to the thing. Thank you all, and behold and partake of tip at tortugan.wordpress.com. Where I've been trying to keep that with the linkages. It's very rudimentary. It's a free hosting thing. It cost me absolutely nothing because a friend of mine happens to have a server. He's a truck driver and he has his own computer server. I'm not sure how he manages that, but he does. And so that's where the actual bits on there. So it's been a low budget operation from the beginning. Someday, the grand goal is that there'll be people joining me in the project, and it eventually will continue the project after I'm gone, because I don't want all this to stop. There's too much work to do, and it's biting off an awful lot, but it needs to be done. We need to have things where we've got easily accessible information and brains to pick on every matter to make it that the science data that's available that makes creationism look pathetic is so readily accessible and shared by people that life is miserable for creationists, because they won't be able to keep up with this. So you can become a patron at patreon.com, downward tip. And they'll also, when I get the linkages up on the video description, that'll be in there as well. And there's also www.gofundme.com, DCGo, where my GoFundMe thing, where also you can put in things. You can do recurring donations however you want. So I'm shamelessly can rattling on that, and now we have concluded that part of the episode and get back to our talking head things. Brian rightly points out NCBI is not always full access. Sometimes when you bring up things, they'll just be abstracts. But that's why what you want to do is copy the whole text title of the work. Or if it's got if there's a colon and then a bunch of subsections, you may be able to do it in other ways. But anyway, you can look up that, do a Google search on that, and sometimes you'll be able to find the paper open access somewhere, and as well as seeing things that may be similar to it, and you can poke around and find other things. The other bit is when you find a good paper, read the footnotes and check to see what their main items are. You want to be hunting for the salient issue and the technical work that is the reason for why they have that in the salient issue. And then you can move on and focus your research on particular areas. Nider says, also know your limits. If you're not good at debating because of temper problems, G-Man, Aaron Ra, can't argue outside of a script, SFT, Hovind, or whatever, then don't debate. Exactement. Debating should be a form of improv theater. It's a structured improv theater. And ironically, I think the reason why I did as well with Kent is that it was in fact a structured debate, which means that Kent has to shut up at some point, just as I do. And you get a chance to collect your thoughts and organize and proceed. And then if you're doing your improv properly, when you get your chance to talk again, you can deploy your arguments as relentlessly as possible. And plus, you also should have a bit to throw your opponent off their guard by knowing their argument better than they do and knowing the counter argument way better than they do. Some that are just video people, you'll have to probably watch a lot of their videos. Although if you look at somebody like a Kent Hovind, or for that matter, Standing for Truth, there's a lot of repetition there, awful lot of repetition. And that means that you can build off of their core points and not have to worry about every little blip of things. And remember the basic questions of source methods. The matter of where did you hear that? How did you fact check it? What do you think happened? What about this? Who's doing the work? Do you read the work? Do you fact check what you read? Those are all the most basic of source methods questions. And the thing that pisses me off about a lot of debates are people who don't approach that. So if anybody's going to debate Hovind and not challenge his source base, you're giving him an open door to walk through and just spew his tropes. You can deal with the tropes as well, but you have to be wary of where you want to get onto. I try to steer people away from origins or bust as much as possible, because that's just a quagmire. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there the universe? All of those origins questions, you're not going to resolve them. Scientists can't resolve them because you're going far back in time. You don't have a time machine, and so where are you stuck? So put the person into an area where you can settle stuff. Just because we don't know how life originated doesn't mean the reptile-mammal transition isn't there. And you can objectively observe that the creationists don't deal with the reptile-mammal transition. I wrote a bloody book on it, shameless plug, that everybody can play around with. If for those of you watching, if you haven't gotten Evolution Slam Dunk, please do. I'm very proud of the work. It's a comprehensive discussion of both the science evidence for the reptile-mammal transition and a bunch of other connected stuff, and a complete takedown of all anti-evolutionists, and I mean all who have ever ventured onto that. It's a small club. It's only about 20 people, but they're usually the heavy guns. Most of the intelligent design people and the heavier hitters in creationism have tiptoed near to the reptile-mammal transition over the years, and it ain't a pretty picture. So I want more people to know about it, so they know about probenognaathids, they know about all the fun and games that went on during the Mesozoic with the therapsids, cynodonts, and all the rest. This is our origins, and it's a colossally impressive pile of data field that isn't being used nearly as much. Brian, Immutable points out that SFT only understands 1960s genetics, if that. Or actually, it's worse than that, because he only understands what the creationist has told him about 1960s genetics, and he doesn't get farther on that. So he brandishes created heterozygosity and all of the little buzzwords that he uses as if he had worked this out carefully. And as Jackson has done, and I've tried to in my own way, to ask him to apply those notions to data field outside of where he was used to because his creationist sources didn't discuss them, he's at a complete loss. He just goes silent because he doesn't understand the core concepts and therefore can't actively apply them to new data, because all he's doing is repeating a trope about a data field he has not himself studied. And I think that becomes quite clear the more you approach it from a source methods direction. So, Brian, it would be impressive to you if SFT actually understood anything. It would be to me, too. And given the fact that the information is available so readily, SFT can't even fact-check that damn sword. That he, I had to actually prod him into bringing up the book that he relied on for some of this information, which, of course, he never bothered to fact-check either. All he's done is parasitically read people that say what he wants to be true. And then he memorizes enough of what he wants and repeats it with absolute confidence. In the same way, Kent Hovind and all the other creationists are just bleary-eyed confident that they're right, because in their frame, they are right. In their presuppositional worldview, where they trim down the data field to where they haven't really bothered about stuff. If you saw the latest Kent Hovind debate, he was going on his usual bit. What would be the common ancestor between a mosquito and a whale? That's pretty far back. And the ancestor would not look like either a mosquito or a whale. Can we be a little closer? What about the last 500 million years of vertebrate fossil record, including those therapsids? He hasn't dealt with that at all. Now, where somebody who's a detail fiddler like Aaron Ra was useful is that he knows the details of systematics extremely well. But Aaron is not a source methods guy, and he's not exploring much about how Kant constructs his arguments. Not can Kant account for the differences between squirrels and chipmunks. Is Kant even reading anything about squirrels or chipmunks? And can he have a model that can be applied to anything? It's that is at the core of source methods. And I want to see more people deal with that aspect of it, because I would contend it's going to strengthen your hand, because you're now no longer just saying, well, no, you think that because you have a holy book. Oh, if you take that kind of an argument, whoop, you've lost a part of the audience right over there. Immutable Destiny says, I don't think he actually reads the articles he has, or at the very least, extremely selective. The vast majority of what I've seen SFT offer is essentially stuff that's filtered through his secondary apologetics. So you find the points that are raised by Samford, the points that are raised by Tompkins, the arguments that are being raised in Answers in Genesis and ICR, and he is perfectly good at repeating what he's read, but has zero capacity for fact-checking any of it, to find out whether, is he being sold a bill of goods, and how would he know? Brian Stevens, even a wasp and an ant common go back in the millions. Yes, that would be the Cretaceous sphecomyrmids. Oh, they thought I didn't know about that? Yeah, sphecomyrmids are let's see, myrmids are the wasp ants that technically are classified as the basal ant, because they do have a metapleural gland, which is, I think that's how it was, metapleural gland, of which, by the way, nobody knows quite yet what the hell they do. There are like 20,000 species of ants, and only a handful of them have even been characterized, and in none of them, like half a dozen, have anyone really pinned down. They figure metapleural glands secrete something. It's a little teeny gland on the butt of an ant. Now, if you think how small the average ant is and how small a gland on the butt of an average ant is, needless to say, it's not an easy thing to study. But anyway, the E.O. Wilson and others had worked out what an ancestral wasp ant ought to be, and that's what sphecomyrmids were. So it was one of those delicious predictions, which was fulfilled really fast. I mean, they proposed it in the early 60s, and in the mid-60s, they'd found the fossils of them. And I discuss all of that in Evolution Slam Dunk. You'll find out a bunch of stuff on that in there. So there's another shameless book plug. You can find, I don't have my link up to it, but you can find links to it directly at website, and my novel, too, if you like historical science fiction mystery stuff, Paralogs of Phileas Fogg. I'm also slogging away on the second book in that cycle. If I can keep going and have enough for food and ink and occasional appliances breaking down where you have to replace shit, and I will be keeping at this as long as I bloody well can. Immutable Destiny says, the issue, though, RJ, is if you ask him some of the requisite knowledge to understand a topic, like what amino acid always is first in the synthesis of an amino acid, he doesn't know. Yeah, because he hasn't tried to think through what his model is in the structure of things. And because huge amounts of the actual relevant technical literature aren't showing up in the creationist apologetics. Remember, that's another thing I'm measuring in the TIP project. I keep track of what sources are drawn on by anti-evolutionists and what ones aren't. And it's roughly about 15% of my data field. But my data field is 27,000 sources. And my data field is a floor, not a ceiling, which means that their source base is smaller than that 15% because my source base is not the whole data field. Plus, a huge block, in the case of Sanford's book, it's been running close to 50% of their source citations are functionally for authority quotes rather than data field. And so that a much smaller proportion of that, of the sources that they cite technically, are actually being addressed at the data level. And that means that I as a rough heuristic, creationists are ignoring 90% of the data field. That's a simple heuristic. And I will type that in for everyone to make a post-it out of. And the idea that you can come up with a viable theory of anything when you are avoiding 90% of the data is just poppycock. You need to explain 100% of the data. You need to explain the data field better than your opponents. And since the evolutionists are generating the data field, and even the uncertain areas, all of the, oh gosh, this is a problem for abiogenesis, who do you think developed all of that? Are the people doing abiogenesis research? Because they don't want to have an answer, they want to have the correct answer, and they're going to be diligent and work it through. Brian Stevens, American Museum of Natural History, that AMNH, you lucky duck. That's New York City, major university. Stephen Jay Gould, I think, or was he up at Harvard? I can't recall. There are an awful lot of big institutions. Carnegie in Pittsburgh, that Professor Lowe, the mammal paleontologist, is from there. I'm in Spokane, Washington, where we've got some nice state universities and colleges and the like, but we're not heavy guns in terms of a lot of the technical research. Vesta says that 90% seems a bit low. Well, I'm charitable, even if it's actually more than that. And in some areas it is. I mean, functionally, anti-evolutionists are missing virtually 100% of the reptile-mammal transition data field. Neuroscience research is a field that's almost completely invisible in anti-evolution apologetics and in religious apologetics. Things about whether the soul is a viable hypothesis, what's the nature of mind, consciousness, morality, ethics, are there evolutionary underpinnings of them, are there neurophysical underpinnings of them, what roles do dopamines and all these other things play in our behavior. That stuff is just barely touched on, and usually in the ricochet modes. So as an overall heuristic, that 90% is an easily defendable one, and one that is a disaster, where oh, you're thinking you're going to be taken seriously when you're missing 90% of the data. Au contraire, that doesn't work out all that well. Anybody has any questions on me? Feel free. I'm RJ Downard at AOL or RJ Downard on Twitter, and anybody that's on Twitter. And spread the word about it. If you have a question about any of these creation evolution related topics, shoot me a tweet. It's best to do it probably as a direct message because it'll show up faster that way. If it's just a mentioned tweet and it's like 8 hours ago, by the time I get up, I may miss it. So it's better to do that as a direct message, and then I'll be happy to share. And if you can also do it as an open access one, if that's the case. When I'm up, which is in the afternoon on into the wee hours, things that are tagged on me, I'll be catching them directly. Brian Seaman says, Carnegie is great. They accept PhD thesis submissions from autodidacts. Of course, it has to be straight up to get approved. Yeah, all of this is an indication of how broad-ranging and open the field is. If you're curious about a technical paper that you can't get a hold of, write the damn scientist, email him and or her, and odds are they'll send you that, just because they'd say, oh, thank you, explain why, and they'll send you the damn thing. That's happened with me. So don't be shy on the thing. Scientists love stressing the material. Mutable Destiny says the primary issue with the biogenesis isn't the chemistry, it's more so is what exactly the conditions of early life was, because it's hard to figure that out. Yeah, it's imagine the old cliche with Darwin was, imagine a warm little pond where stuff comes together and first life begins. Well, it's way more complicated than that. First of all, you're thinking in terms of an entire planet. You've got oceans that have to settle in. You have incoming bombardments. The late heavy bombardment is probably vaporizing early oceans, and then they settle in again. So life systems may have developed fairly frequently, but just gotten swept away like shaking the Etch-a-Sketch. The other fundamental issue is the DNA RNA system that we use with carbon and nitrogen chomps, carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur. Those are the main elements that are used in living systems. Is that the only way? Is that it? Or are there potential other ways that could have used different kinds of nucleic acid structures and silicon and other things? My bet is that chomps, carbon-based form, water-based form is the only game that really works in the long run. So that, but if you show me an alien organism that doesn't follow that rule, I'll be happy to change my mind. The thing is trying to deal with it experimentally. Just as you can't make a mountain range in the lab or make a black hole in a particle accelerator, good thing that we can't. There are some things that are really hard to get at. I've mentioned before how the fact that we don't really know how lightning is formed in a thundercloud. We know lightning is electrical, and you can figure out how much electricity is involved in a lightning stroke, and you can trigger them off in a variety of ways, including going out and golfing in the thunderstorm. That will often do it. But just exactly how the positive and negatives get segregated enough to generate that zot is not known. And in part, it's difficult to model because even though it's water vapor and dust particles, it exceeds the ability even of supercomputers to tackle. And that is probably not going to be the case indefinitely. But the point is that even something as simple as lightning in a thundercloud can still be sufficiently intricate that it's not easy to resolve. That's way simpler than abiogenesis, where you've got to figure out all the interacting variables. One of the most recent papers that John Sutherland has been doing, and I'm pretty sure that's his name. You can go Google him, and most of his technical papers will be available somewhere or other, open access. They've done an enormous amount of research on hydrothermal vents and that kind of biochemistry, which means it's happening underwater. So all the arguments about what was going on in the Earth's atmosphere and whether we had ozone to shield ultraviolet light, doesn't matter. The ocean is acting as a shield. And so instead of the warm little surface pond that Darwin was thinking of, it's looking much more like a churning hydrothermal vent and a vast interconnecting network of chemical systems. And they realized that some things involving, I think one of the RNA nucleotides, it was really difficult to synthesize abiotically. When they were using these hydrothermal vent experiments and adding in phosphorus, kaboom, it was as easy peasy as anything. So, and it's kind of like flight, where an awful lot of people struggled for a long time to get people into the air and crashed and broke their necks. But once the bicycle mechanics from Dayton figured it out, why, gosh, everybody could do it. Immutable Decimate said there are other forms of self-replicators that don't have the same helical structure as DNA. They can be very complicated geometries. And there's also the possibility that they contributed to prebiotic processes, even though they didn't end up incorporated in the final organisms that made the cut and eventually led to LUCA, the last universal common ancestor. So there's a lot of variables involved. Immutable also says, hypothetically, you could generate microscopic black holes, but they would evaporate almost instantly. I'm glad that they evaporate almost instantly. Vesta says that they're 2 hours away from the Tyrrell Museum. Oh, you're up in Canada. Yeah, I visited the Royal Tyrrell up in Drumheller, I think, something like that, up in Alberta. And it's out in the middle of nowhere, and it's also an active paleontological dig. And you're in an area where you're looking at Jurassic Cretaceous things. It was seafront property, or near to it at that time. And it's a really splendid museum, even when I visited, which was a ways ago, like 20 years. It's probably expanded even more since. I think 3 Philip Curie, or one of the ones, is one of the people that involved with the Royal Tyrrell. So yes, I can heartily recommend it. The one wonderful deposit that I haven't been able to visit in quite a few years, but the vernal dinosaur deposits down in Utah. That's also something that's kind of awkward to get to. That's the problem. The eroding rock where dinosaurs and other critters are found are often out in the middle of nowhere because they don't have cities built onto them, and therefore you have to go a long ways to get to them. Yeah, okay, that's the way it is. But you can find a lot of the information then in the technical papers about them, and good books and guides about the matter. Whatever area you can tackle at whatever level you feel comfortable with. Just remember that if you're planning on being a debater and engaging in the lion's den with anti-evolutionists, you want to up the ante to be ahead of them, not behind. You want to be sufficiently comfortable with yourself and your understanding of things that you can answer a good question with a good answer. And I felt happy with my debate with Kent Hovind because audience questions were coming in, including some on baraminology, and Kent couldn't answer them. Excuse me, this is your creationism and you don't know, and I'm explaining the creationist doctrines and also what's wrong with them, at a level that Kent wasn't able to compete with. Well, I felt happy after that. It means that you're less likely to be temperamental. There are some people that could just drive you nuts. Nephilim is like that. If he's in a structured debate, he's manageable. But if you just engage a conversation with him, he'll drive you nuts with his presuppositional hammering away. So don't ever go in to a discussion with somebody like a Nephilim on their turf, on their hangout, because they're going to be governing the shots and they'll get you infuriated. But in a genuine discussion, there's some creationists you can have a genuine discussion with. Some are very amiable. Mike Riddle is quite amiable. Clueless is all get out, but amiable. So some are pleasant. There can be annoying scientists as well, which is one of the reasons why it's up to informed reporters and journalists and autodidacts like ourselves to weigh in this area, because the scientists aren't necessarily good at being able to explain their field easily to others. And in some areas like geology, if you ever attend a geology presentation at a bar, which I've done, there's a bunch of them in our local areas, and they meet there and talk about their latest skivvy. They're talking shop. And if you don't know the shop, they're not dumbing this down for the audience at all. And you can ask informed questions and kind of clarify that. But that's why knowing a little bit of what the terminology is will help a lot. Immutable destiny. Kent's arguments are always appeal to common sense, and they always take the same issue. Oh, yeah. That's one advantage to debating somebody who is so rigidly boring as a Kent Hovind. His very little of his argument is anything fresh compared to what he was doing in his videos decades ago. So that makes an advantage, is you can see really old videos, and then you want to check to see what some of his newer stuff is, and you can track up about where he is on the landscape. And you can also, again, the network of saying, well, okay, he brings up this stupid thing. Let's find out about it. By the way, that was one that I've written down from Kent's latest debate that I was going to investigate. And maybe somebody will be able to already have done it. I haven't Googled it yet. It's Kent was saying that there's enough water in the ocean. If the surface of the earth were flattened, there would be 8,000 feet of water surrounding the earth. And I'm not sure that that's the case. That I would want to actually see the math on that one and see whether there is any documentation on it. Nidir says, also don't get any Cy Ten Bruggen-Catus sort of apologetics. Headache. Oh yeah, headache. It's a migraine. He's a hyper presuppositionalist. The same thing as Nephilim. And they have an argument where they'll try to jujitsu you with some question. I think, what is truth? Why is anything moral? And because they're proceeding from a presuppositional philosophical frame, one of the postings that I did is an ill wind in Tortuga. That's where I was coming up with Tortugan concept. And another posting I had up was on Noma Revisited, and you'll find it at my website. And it's a revision of the idea of the difference between science and philosophy and decidable and undecidable proposition. And you'll find that at my website, www.tartukin.com. It's an older piece, but it still has the basics issues involved. And in fact, the new book that on atheism that Jackson and I will be dealing with will be discussing a lot of that thing as well, because some issues are intrinsically philosophical in nature. Some issues are ones where what you assume is what you proceed. Oh, morality and ethics are like that. Even some scientific issues that are inherently unresolvable fall into that category. Qualia problems as to why red appears to be red and not something else, or why we see color instead of smell it, why those modalities. They're functionally unresolvable scientifically. There's no experiment that you can come up with that can get out of the conundrum of that. And if you get stuck on a presuppositional philosophical argument, you may as well just pack up your bags and go, because you're going to be having dueling presuppositions, dueling axioms. And you're going to then have to defend why your axiom is better than their axiom. And if you haven't thought that through well, you're going to get headaches. You want to try to force argument as much as possible back onto the turf of explaining data. And when you try that with Nephilim and others, they fall apart because they're only presenting that presuppositional argument. Mutable Destiny says size argument still has the same issue all presupposition arguments has. Yeah, it's... I alluded to it in one of the chapters of the old tip book that if you pursue any subject at all, eventually you're going to arrive at a spot that nobody knows the answer to. That I think I used the example of why is the sky blue, Daddy? And well, that's because of nitrogen, and it scatters the light, and the blue wavelengths come in. Well, why is there nitrogen? Well, that's one of the elements that's formed and is made from main sequence stars. Well, where did my main stars come from? Well, that's due to the collapse of mass in the early universe from hydrogen, and eventually they go supernova and make the... Well, why was there an early universe? And eventually you're going to reach a point where you're going to turn to the kid and say, I think you need to go and play now, okay? That you will always arrive at some unresolved question at the deep, 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 deep core. Like, why is the universe mathematical? Why does E equal mc squared? Does it have to? Well, now you're in philosophical discussions, things about multiverses, things about the fundamental nature of particles and whether there's any limit to it. And all of those are ones that you're in speculation land. And if you're in that, well, gosh, you're just going to roll all over the place, and you'll never be able to get out of it. Immutable Destiny says, Brian, I think it's more of the case that it has to be true, so I'll use it and be damned either way. That is the lure of a presuppositional argument. I also call it the jujitsu trick approach, where you can get somebody on a point, and Kant was trying to do that in his most recent debate as well, where you're forced into admitting something that's like obvious, and then he has sort of got you on his presuppositional hook where he can now avoid thinking about everything else. So the idea would be whatever philosophy you have, go right ahead. But how do you apply it, and how do you deal with anything? So if somebody's going to try to wave absolute morality at you and try to go, why doesn't everything go in an evolutionary framework? Well, let's tackle a real example and go for things like slavery. And now they're at a disadvantage because they're not going to be able to appeal to their magic book. I think about the only magic book that has ever explicitly banned slavery were the Mormons. And do you really want to go there? Everybody else tolerated it. So now you say, well, a lot of good your absolute morality is. You can't even figure that one out. Vestas, the thing with Nephi is you can't beat him. It's stupid. That's true. There is no, this is a limbo bar that already is in negative turf. It's in a trench, and Nephi is down there, and he's like a thing that he manages to push the bar even lower into the negative. Yeah, he can drive me nuts. And I think almost everybody who tries to have a direct conversation with Nephi as opposed to a fixed debate will just lose their temper at some point. You're just aggravated at his hammering away. He won't answer a question that you want, and he's demanding that you answer again and again and again the thing that you already answered, but he didn't like your answer. And at that point, you just, I blew a gasket, and there's an awful lot of people that blow gaskets with Neffy. If you've never seen Neffy, you are blessed. Let's see there. Have you seen Behind Crude Lies yet? No, I haven't seen that one. Brian said there are some flurfers, those are flat earthers, who can give him competition, though. Oh, yeah, it can be argued that if somebody can be a flat earther in 2019, they have to have major league stupid down, or they're just craven and they're just doing it for the funding from idiots that are giving them money. But I'm always charitable. I never underestimate the ability of people to be stupid. Tortukans have no limit on that kind of thing. Well, we've gone kind of an hour in not particularly fancy schmancy mode, because it was just my talking head here. But thank you very, very, very much. Whether or not I'm going to be able to get things up to date and structured to work out the real live adult video back in, well, not XXX. You don't ever want to see that. But the normal format where I'm actually able to use regular video and show things to the camera and all that kind of stuff. I don't know yet, because we're still wondering about to find one that my computer system here can handle, and the bandwidths, all that, even lowering to 480p was causing it to seize up. So I don't know, but perhaps the talking head mode will be useful. I've at least figured out how to put some of the little things up as the little sub windows. So away we go. Oh, Mutable Destiny. Here's Neffy's trick. He's always drunk when he's on the air. You can hear it in his voice and his speech patterns. It may very well be, or he may just come out of the box that way. Vestas says, when I was a teenager, I had an uncle who was a Jehovah's Witness minister. I was not his favorite relative. Yes. I met Jehovah's Witnesses who are just sweet people, but my gosh, on the theological end, how they can manage to swallow that one is an unresolved conundrum. Well, anyway, thanks, gang. Check out all my works. Tell people about the works. Help rattle the can for the project. Even if they can't help out, they can definitely download the material, learn the techniques. Brian Stevens, Super Symmetry is pretty dead now. There's a distinct lack of support across the board. Yeah, I was fond of Super Symmetry, though. I would have liked it to be true. Although you never can tell how ideas might percolate around and then some new context comes up. This happens over and over again in the sciences, where something that was thought to be kind of a dead letter turns out to be a useful thing to explain something way farther down the road in a new context. So I'm not willing to cut him out. Investa says that his Jehovah's Witness minister was a young Earth creationist. That actually is kind of interesting, because I don't think Jehovah's Witnesses are doctrinally committed to young Earth creationism. So he was jumping off two gangplanks into empty pools simultaneously. Well, anyway, that would be the end of it today. And we will, at the very least, be able to do this shtick next week. Whether or not I will be able to eventually get back to normal video mode, we'll see. I'm just winging it as we go. So thank you very much for everybody, and see you next week. And we are about to shut down. Okay, and that's ending stream.